The first true spring days of May 1945 did not feel like victory. They felt like the stunned quiet that falls when the last shell has exploded and the last scream has faded into the smoke. A pale, reluctant sun climbed over a Germany that had forgotten its own shape. From the salt-stung dunes of Eswelt to the knife-edged ridges of the Zugspitze, the land lay exhausted, as though it had carried a 12-year fever and had finally collapsed under the weight. Every road had become the same road, a sluggish, ash-gray vein clogged with the wreckage of a madness that had devoured itself. Abandoned Panther turrets jutted from flooded fields like the skulls of prehistoric beasts. Mercedes staff cars lay belly up, doors flung open, leather map cases flapping like wounded birds. Horse-drawn pange wagons and baby carriages pushed by grandmothers creaked past under impossible burdens of eiderdowns, copper kettles, framed wedding portraits, and grandfathers who had not spoken since Stalingrad. Children born the year the swastika flags went up walked without wonder, dragging wooden rifles carved from bedposts or dolls made from rolled-up bandages, their eyes already old. Slipping through this slow funeral procession moved the last, ragged remnants of the Deutsches Rotes Feldlaserzug, small, desperate bands of nurses who had been retreating westward since the ice on the Elbe cracked and the sky turned red with tracer fire in late January. This particular group had once been 61 souls. Now only 35 women and one 17-year-old orderly limped along a muddy cart track outside the village of Oberstdorf, pulling 8 litters improvised from barn doors, bicycle wheels, and the sides of a burned-out Opel Blitz ambulance. On those litters lay the final patients they had sworn before God and their oaths never to abandon. A 17-year-old Marine auxiliary whose left arm now ended in a blackened stump wrapped in a child's embroidered pillowcase. A 36-year-old infantry Hauptfeldwebel coughing up black flecks from lungs burned by white phosphorus outside Botzen. A 20-year-old theology student turned panzerjogger who had not uttered a word since his entire company was buried alive by a Soviet rocket. Barrage near Cottbus. The nurses took turns dropping to their knees in the muck every few hundred meters, tipping the last mouthfuls of melted snow from battered canteens onto tongues cracked and bleeding, whispering the same broken promises they no longer believed. Only a little farther, main shots. The Americans have real hospitals. Hold on just a little longer. They had eaten almost nothing solid for 27 days. Their food had become whatever the ruined landscape still grudgingly surrendered. Frozen potatoes dug from fields with entrenching tools, nettles boiled into bitter soup, the occasional strip of saddle leather cut from a dead cavalry horse and stewed until it stopped tasting of sweat and terror. Their bodies had begun devouring themselves weeks earlier. Muscle melted away to feed hearts that still stubbornly beat, skin stretched so thin over cheekbones that a harsh word felt sharp enough to tear it. When they paused to rest, they no longer sat. They simply folded forward like broken umbrellas, foreheads resting on knees because keeping the spine upright required calories they had already spent on yesterday's march. Let me give 10 of them back their names because the nameless are the first to be erased. First is Schwester Maria Theresa Lang, 24, from the steep vineyards above Boppard where the Rhine loops like a silver ribbon on feast days. She still carries a tiny, oil-stained missile her mother pressed into her hand the morning she left for nursing school in Mainz in 1941. Every night she writes a new name on the blank pages at the back in pencil so faint it is almost breath. The boys who died while she held their hands. The last entry, scratched by the light of a burning haystack 3 nights ago beside a boy from Bremen, reads only, May 9th, Karl-Heinz Weber, 18. May the angels lead you into paradise. Second is Oberpflegerin Astrid Nielsen, 30, born on the windswept island of Amrum, where the dunes shift like living things. She walks with her arm around 17-year-old orderly Jonas, who lost 3 fingers and most of his right ear to frostbite during the retreat across the frozen Frisch's half. She hums him the same old Frisian lullaby her grandmother sang when the fishing boats were overdue, though her throat is so raw the tune comes out like wind over broken glass. Third is Clara Hoffmann, 22, from the high meadows above Mittenwald, who still wears the tiny carved wood ibex her father whittled the week before he marched east and never came home. Every time a thunderbolt screams overhead, she touches the carving and whispers the same desperate bargain. Take me instead, dear God, not the boys on the litters. Fourth is Frieda Kaufmann, 20, from a wheat farm near Osnabrück where the sky is so wide it swallows sound. She has not laughed since the night a field hospital near Kiev burned with 500 patients inside. She walks in total silence, saving every heartbeat for pulling the heaviest litter, the one carrying a grenadier whose face is half gone. Fifth is Miriam Adler, 26, from the old Jewish quarter of Worms before the synagogues burned on Kristallnacht. She has worn a tiny silver chai pendant against her skin for 6 years, hidden beneath her Red Cross brassard, certain that discovery would mean the same fate as her parents, her brother, her little sister in 1942. She is the group's silent anchor, the one the others look to when the last spark of hope flickers. Sixth is Bridget Mayer, 23, from the rolling hills of the Pfalz, who still carries a pressed cornflower from the bouquet her fiancé gave her the day before he shipped out to Africa and vanished near Tobruk. She sings softly when the pain in her feet becomes louder than thought. Seventh is Helena Vogel, 27, from the shipyards of Hamburg, who lost her husband and 3 small children when the city became a firestorm in July 1943. She walks with the stillness of someone who has already attended her own funeral and is simply waiting for the body to notice. Eighth is Johanna Stein, 25, from the cherry orchards of the Markerflurland, who still wears her mother's simple gold wedding ring on a leather cord around her neck because her own fingers have swollen too much for rings. She counts steps aloud under her breath. The only way she knows the world is still turning. Ninth is Lena Berger, 21, from the dark forests of the Bayerischer Wald, who once dreamed of becoming a schoolteacher before the war turned her hands to bandages instead of chalk. She still carries a tiny slate and a piece of chalk in her pocket and sometimes, when no one is looking, writes a single word on a flat stone, Morgen, tomorrow. 10th is Rosa Schmidt, 28, from the slate-roofed villages of the Mosel, who once studied medicine in Freiburg before the yellow stars appeared. She still carries a dog-eared anatomy textbook with half the pages torn out for cigarette papers, and she recites the names of bones under her breath like a prayer when the nights are darkest. On the late afternoon of May 10, 1945, they are dragging themselves along a sunken lane outside Oberstdorf where the orchards are so heavy with apple and cherry blossom, the branches sweep the ground like mourners in white. Pink and white petals fall in slow, endless curtains, sticking to uniforms stiff with old blood and new despair. The beauty feels like cruelty. In the distance comes the low, confident rumble of American engines, deeper than the frantic snarl of Maybachs, steadier, the sound of men who know the war is already theirs. Jeeps appear first, kicking up pale dust, then M4 tanks with white stars painted bold as absolution, then an endless river of olive-drab trucks flying small pennants that flutter like children's hopes. The nurses stop as one body, 35 hearts hammering against ribs sharp enough to cut paper. This is the moment every Goebbels newsreel, every screaming loudspeaker, every whispered barracks rumor has promised them, the hour when the Amists take their revenge. Maria Theresa's knees buckle first. She drops the litter rope and collapses into the mud, instinctively covering the unconscious Marine auxiliary with her own body. Astrid raises both arms high and shouts the only English she trusts. Red Cross, medical, please no shoot. Clara begins the act of contrition in frantic Latin. Frida stands frozen, eyes enormous, waiting for the bullets she has already accepted. And Miriam Adler, quiet Miriam with the hidden chai, steps forward one trembling pace and calls out in a voice scraped raw by 27 days of silence. If you have come to end us, do it quickly. We have carried death long enough to recognize its face. The American column rolls to a halt 70 meters away. Dust settles like theater curtains. 90 rifles track, then freeze. For 35 heartbeats, the only sound is cherry blossom drifting between the two groups like slow-motion snow. Then the lead jeep's door opens and Captain Robert James Callahan, 35, from Chicago's South Side, whose own grandmother still lit candles for the famine dead, steps out. He has fought from the beaches of Anzio to the gates of Dachau, has seen things that will wake him screaming for the rest of his life, but the sight before him now empties every thought from his head. These are not soldiers. These are starving children wearing the one symbol every army in the world is supposed to honor. He raises his right hand, palm forward, the oldest gesture of peace humanity has ever invented. Every rifle behind him lowers as if pulled by the same invisible string. A medic, Sergeant Samuel Weiss, 24, from Brooklyn's Brownsville, whose parents still spoke Yiddish at the dinner table, vaults from a truck with hands empty and raised, walking forward speaking the soft Mosel Franconian his grandmother taught him before she died in 1939. Schwestern alles ist gut. Niemand word juk etwas tun. Side in Sicherheit, safe. The word floats across the lane like a soap bubble no one dares breathe on. Master Sergeant Luigi Moretti, a bricklayer's son from Newark, takes one look at the skeletal figures and starts bellowing orders that have nothing to do with war. Blankets! Hot food! Get the goddamn mobile kitchen up here yesterday. Move your asses! Within 90 seconds, GIs who were ready to kill are lifting stretchers with the tenderness of fathers carrying sleeping children, wrapping thick wool blankets around shoulders sharp enough to cut paper, pressing canteens of cold, clean water to lips that have forgotten what water tastes like. A private from Georgia pulls a baby Ruth from his pocket and offers it to Miriam. She stares at the bright wrapper as if it is the first color she has seen since 1933, then begins to cry so hard her entire body shakes like a leaf in a storm. They load the entire group, nurses, patients, stretchers, and all, into the backs of 6x6 trucks and drive 9 kilometers to the forward clearing station of the 3rd Infantry Division, the Marne division that has been fighting since North Africa. When the tailgates drop and the canvas flaps are rolled back, the nurses step into a world that feels like the first page of a New Testament. Electric lights powered by growling generators flood everything in warm, impossible gold. The air smells of real coffee, frying bacon, pine disinfectant, and something the nurses have not smelled in years: mercy. Rows of hospital cots with real pillows and snow-white sheets wait beneath a giant tent painted with red crosses the size of house doors. Medical supplies rise in neat, gleaming mountains that reach the canvas roof. Plasma bottles still wearing their paper sleeves, morphine syrettes in bricks of 100, crates stamped, penicillin, US Army, miracle drug, bandages so white they seem to glow with their own light. Schwester Agnes Dietrich, who has not cried since the night a field hospital near Vyazma burned with 600 patients inside, takes one step inside, looks at the endless shelves, and her legs simply stop working. 2 American corpsmen catch her before she hits the ground. They lay her on a cot, pile 10 blankets on top of her, and bring her a tin mug of coffee so loaded with sugar it could float a horseshoe. She drinks one trembling sip, then another, and then the tears come, great, tearing sobs that shake the cot until the springs sing. Around her the scene repeats 35 times. Grown women weeping into coffee mugs, pressing slices of fresh bread to their cheeks like lovers, clutching wool blankets as if they are the first soft things they have touched since childhood. The division surgeon, Major Nathan Rosenberg from Baltimore, whose parents fled Kishinev pogroms in 1903, walks the aisle taking pulses and shining penlights into eyes the color of winter skies. He stops beside Maria Theresa, who is still clutching her missal like a talisman. "When did you last eat, sister?" he asks in careful, Swabian-accented German. She has to search her memory through layers of fog. 27 days, her major, perhaps 28. He closes his eyes for a long second, mutters something in Yiddish that sounds like a prayer and a curse, then turns and roars in English. "Every German nurse in this tent gets 8 full rations starting now, and nobody leaves until they've had 9ths if they want them. That is a direct order from the Surgeon General himself if I have to invent it." The first real meal arrives on gleaming metal trays carried by cooks who have never before seen grown women cry over stew. Thick, rich beef and vegetable soups swimming with carrots, onions, and potatoes still wearing their jackets. Fresh bakery bread still warm from the traveling ovens, real butter, canned pears floating in heavy syrup so sweet it makes teeth ache with joy, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. They eat in terrified silence at first, certain their shrunken stomachs will revolt. Then something ancient and unstoppable takes over. Bowls are scraped clean, held up wordlessly for more, scraped clean again. One girl eats so quickly she has to stumble outside to be sick in the grass, then returns with tears streaming down her face whispering, "Bit, may I have another bowl?" The cook from Newark fills it to overflowing and tells her the cauldron is hers for the night. Private Antonio Morales from Los Angeles notices several nurses trying to hide bread rolls and pear tins inside their torn uniforms. He kneels beside Clara, the one with the carved ibex, and opens a wooden crate the size of a small coffin. Inside are hundreds of C-rations, Hershey bars, tins of Spam, packages of chewing gum, cartons of Lucky Strikes. "Mira, Hermana," he says softly, "this is 1 box. We have 300 more on the trucks. Eat until your belly hurts. Tomorrow we're baking cherry pies with the orchards outside. I swear on my abuela's grave." Clara looks at the mountain of food, then at Morales's gentle brown eyes, and something inside her finally shatters. She buries her face in his shoulder and sobs like a child who has been lost in the dark for 5 long years and suddenly sees sunrise. By nightfall the physical change is already visible to the naked eye. Cheeks that were gray at noon now carry the faintest flush of rose. Eyes that stared at nothing now follow movement with something dangerously close to wonder. Hands that shook too badly to hold a spoon now grip forks with steady purpose. The American Army nurses, battle-hardened women who landed on Omaha Beach and marched across Europe, bring bars of real Lux soap that smell of spring flowers, clean uniforms dyed soft sky blue from army blankets, even tiny bottles of evening in Paris perfume someone liberated from a shattered perfumery in Reims. They heat water in cut-down fuel drums and help the German girls wash away 5 years of blood, mud, gangrene, and despair. When Maria Theresa sees her reflection in a real mirror for the first time since 1941, she does not recognize the skeleton staring back, but the eyes. The eyes are beginning to remember how to live. Over the next 12 days something happens that no official report ever quite manages to explain. The two medical teams, American and German, begin working side by side as naturally as if they have always been one unit. The German nurses teach the GIs how to stop arterial bleeding with nothing more than a stick and a strip of inner tube, how to quiet a screaming amputee with a whispered Bavarian nursery rhyme in his own dialect, how to stretch one precious ampoule of morphine among 20 dying men by diluting it with boiled stream water and prayer. The Americans show them intravenous penicillin that turns raging wound infections into nothing overnight, plasma that drags boys back from the edge of shock as if by magic, sulfa powder that saves limbs once doomed to the surgeon's saw. They share chocolate bars like priests sharing communion hosts. They trade cigarettes and photographs of sweethearts and, slowly, carefully, pieces of their shattered souls. Mornings become classrooms without walls. In the big surgical tent, Major Rosenberg watches Astrid Nielsen tie a pressure bandage with one hand while holding an artery closed with the thumb of the other, a trick she learned outside Kharkov when both her assistants were killed by the same shell. He nods once, impressed, and teaches her how to start and fore with a 14-gauge needle and a bottle of plasma hung from a rifle cleaning rod. Afternoons become operating theaters where German precision meets American abundance. A 19-year-old GI with a gut wound from a Panzerfaust lies on one table while a 20-year-old German paratrooper with a shattered femur lies on the next, and nobody notices anymore whose uniform the hand saving them once wore. Evenings become something sacred, when the generators are turned down to a whisper and the wounded finally sleep under warm blankets and morphine dreams. Everyone gathers around fires built from cherrywood pruned from the very orchards that witnessed their meeting. American boys bring battered guitars and mouth organs. The German nurses teach them Wolof in Gott's schon Welt, der Lindenbaum, and Muss I den zum Stadtteil hinaus. Someone always starts Lily Marlene, and for 4 minutes the war simply ceases to exist. There are only voices rising together under a sky full of unfamiliar stars. One night Bridget Mayer, the girl from the Pfalz, stands up and sings the old winegrower's blessing, Wach auf, mein Herz, und Singe, in a voice still rough from hunger but clear as mountain water. When the last note fades, there is not a dry eye around the fire, even among the sergeants who swore they ran out of tears somewhere outside Bastogne. Another night Miriam Adler, the girl with the hidden chai, quietly tells the story of Passover for the first time in 6 years, her voice shaking as she explains what Dainu means. Sergeant Weiss listens with tears running down his cheeks, then teaches her the Yiddish lullaby Roshinks mit Mandlin, his mother sang in Brownsville. They sing it together, German and Yiddish weaving like two threads of the same cloth. One afternoon Clara Hoffman, who has not spoken of her brother since 1942, finds herself sitting beside Private Morales while he cleans his rifle. He asks, gently, about the carved ibex. She tells him how her father spent 3 winters carving it from a single piece of linden wood, how her brother carried it in his pocket through Poland, through Russia, until the letter came saying he would not come home. Morales listens without interrupting, then pulls a small wooden crucifix from under his shirt, carved by his own father in New Mexico, and presses it into her hand. For your brother, he says, so he's not alone. She holds the crucifix so tightly it leaves marks in her palm, and for the first time in 3 years she cries without shame. Another evening Frida Kaufman, who has not smiled since Kiev, finds herself laughing, actually laughing, when a GI from Alabama tries to pronounce Guten Abend, and ends up saying something that sounds like a sneeze. The sound startles her so much she claps both hands over her mouth, eyes wide, as though laughter were a foreign language she had forgotten she knew. The Americans cheer, and she laughs again, and the sound is rusty but real. On the evening of May 10, 1945, The field radio crackles with the news the entire world has been waiting for. Germany has surrendered unconditionally at Reims. The war in Europe is over. There is no wild celebration in the clearing station, only a vast, collective exhalation of breath held since September 1939. Men and women who have not touched in friendship for 6 years now embrace without thinking. A Jewish surgeon from Baltimore hugs a former Wehrmacht nurse from Munich. A Catholic farm boy from Iowa kisses the cheek of a girl who once bandaged SS troopers outside Leningrad. Nobody knows what tomorrow will bring, but tonight nobody is shooting. The next morning, the German nurses are loaded gently onto trucks for the short ride to a displaced persons center near Garmisch-Partenkirchen. Many cry, not from fear this time, but because they do not want to leave the Americans who became their family in 12 impossible days. At the center, they receive showers that last until the water runs cold, delousing powder that smells of pine forests, new dresses sewn from army blankets dyed soft cornflower blue, and identity papers stamped civilian medical internee, released without charges. An American colonel, himself the great-grandson of German 48ers who fled after the failed revolution, shakes every hand and says the same thing: "Thank you for saving lives on both sides of this madness. Go home and rebuild. The world is going to need healers more than it ever needed soldiers." They board trains headed in every direction, some north to the cold Baltic, some south to the warm Alps, some west to the scarred Rhine, with small parcels containing soap, coffee, chocolate, and memories heavy enough to last 100 lifetimes. Time, as it always does, marches on. Maria Theresa Lang becomes head of pediatrics at the University Hospital in Tübingen. She plants a cherry tree in the children's courtyard every May and never, ever throws away a crust of bread. Astrid Nielsen opens a small clinic on the island of Swlt and teaches local children to swim, telling them stories of a blossom-covered lane where enemies became brothers. Clara Hoffman enters a convent in the Allgäu, takes the name Sister Ibex, and spends 75 years caring for orphans, wearing her father's carved ibex until the day she dies at 99. Frieda Kaufmann becomes one of northern Germany's most beloved midwives. She names her first daughter Maria Theresa, after the sister who carried her heart across half of Europe, and her second daughter Joy. Miriam Adler emigrates to Israel in 1948, becomes a nurse in a moshav near the Sea of Galilee, and plants cherry trees that still bloom every spring under a sky her parents never lived to see. Bridget Mayer returns to the Pfalz, opens a vineyard school for war orphans, and sings the old winegrower songs every evening until her voice finally gives out at 97. Helena Vogel rebuilds the pediatric ward in Hamburg that was bombed flat in 1943, and every year on May 10th she hangs a wreath of cherry blossoms on the door and tells the new nurses the story of the day kindness won. Johanna Stein tends the old family cherry orchards in the Markgraflerland and every spring sends crates of cherries to the American hospital in Landstuhl with a simple note: "For the boys who remembered how to be human." Lena Berger becomes a schoolteacher after all, teaching children in the Bayerischer Wald to read and write, and always ends the school day with a story about a lane full of blossoms and strangers who chose mercy. Rosa Schmidt finishes her medical studies in Heidelberg, becomes a pediatric surgeon, and every year invites the American medics who saved her life to a cherry festival where they drink new wine and remember. Decades later, when documentary crews with gentle voices and soft lighting ask these white-haired women what they remember most about the war, they never mention the bombs, the hunger, the dead boys in the snow. They speak instead of a clearing station that smelled of coffee on a May evening in 1945. They speak of a captain from Chicago who raised his hand in peace. They speak of a sergeant from Brooklyn who spoke their childhood dialect. They speak of a private from Los Angeles who opened a crate and promised there would always be more. And every single one of them ends the same way, eyes shining with tears that still come easily after 80 years. We walked toward death expecting monsters. We found human beings who remembered how to be kind when kindness was the hardest, bravest thing in the world. This is not legend. It is recorded in the daily journals of the 3rd Infantry Division, in letters sent home by GIs who never forgot those starving girls under the cherry blossoms, in the oral histories preserved by the German Red Cross and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. It happened not once but hundreds of times in the final weeks. American medics feeding Italian prisoners outside Bologna, British doctors operating on wounded Germans in a candlelit church near Lüneburg, Russian nurses sharing bread with captured Austrians under a sky full of searchlights. Tiny moments, quickly forgotten by history books, but eternal proof that even when nations lose their souls, individual human beings can still find theirs. So the next time someone tells you that people are only cruel, that hate is the strongest force on earth. Remember 35 exhausted girls on a blossom-covered road who begged for death and were handed life instead. Remember the soldiers who had every reason for vengeance and chose mercy anyway. And carry their question with you always. When everything around us is burning and the easiest thing is to hate, can ordinary people still find the courage to be kind? They could. We can. I believe that with every cell in my body. If this story moved you even a little, please leave a comment and tell me what it made you feel. And if you want to walk more of these forgotten roads together, roads where light refused to die, hit subscribe. There are thousands more stories waiting, each one a quiet rebellion against despair. Thank you for spending this time with Maria Teresa, Astrid, Clara, Frida, Miriam, Bridget, Helena, Johanna, Lena, Rosa, and all the others whose names the wind has carried away. Take care of each other out there. The world still needs kindness more than ever. See you in the next one.